Okay. And Hussein, should I click on share screen?
Yeah, you can, yes.
Okay. It says that's disabled.
Disabled. Let me see, try one more time.
Okay,
Yes.
now it's okay. Do you see the screen?
Yes, we see it, yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
So, can we start?
Yes.
Okay. Well, at the beginning, hello again. My name is Dejan Mirčetić. I'm coming from the Republic of Serbia, from the University of Novi Sad. Generally, I'm teaching at the Faculty of Technical Sciences, so I'm teaching subjects related to logistics and optimization of logistic processes, inventory control, and all the areas surrounding that. My research area is focused a lot on forecasting and influence on forecasts on the supply chains. I have PhD in hierarchical forecasting, so that's basically what I do and what I teach. As we know, Bachman invited me to present this chapter 7 inventory control, and I will try to briefly present that chapter in the book and maybe add some my comments from my experience and some additional tables and pictures where I can think that maybe contribute to better understanding of the area. This is just the agenda of that chapter in the book, and basically I'll follow all the topics in that chapter, and maybe as I add some additional comments and to better maybe explain some of these areas. Okay. As you know, in many organizations, forecasts guide decisions. We don't just use forecasts by itself. We don't forecast something just to do forecasting. We do that, to make some decision based on that. And here on the picture, we can see the basically driver. So demand forecasting is should be driving if we talk about supply chain inventory management decisions, and later that should drive production planning, and of course production planning will drive procurement of raw materials. So we have this loop which is going directly from demand forecasting, and the logic is that we can find direct connection between the accuracy, how we are doing this demand forecasting, with the processes and decisions that are later based on this demand forecasting. So we can simply say that we have influence on inventory management, production planning, procurement of raw materials, and so on. Generally, it's especially today, it's not just enough to have a point forecast. So to have some mean value of some forecast of any model, we should have some uncertainty around that point forecast. So we should be able to have some kind of forecast distribution surrounding that point forecast, because especially in inventory management, we need to know how much additional stock we should keep in our inventory in order to supply our customers and to have more money value on the market. One thing that is important here is that it is very important to distinguish between forecasting and inventory decisions. Like, we can say that when we forecast something, it's our best, estimation what the future will be. And inventory decisions are something that we are not just depend on the demand forecast, it depends on some other operational, like what is our lead time, what is our possibility to get, how much stock to get in some time, and so on. So demand forecast is very important for inventory decisions, but we cannot mix these two things together, like say that there is equality between them. And of course, there is different kind of systems we can use to control our inventories. Like, for example, let me see. Okay, this is general. We'll later talk about some different systems, how to control stocks, but general story about inventory is that we want to have those materials in our inventory and not to occur stock out. Stock out, if we have stock out situations, generally we lose money. So some customer comes, let's say, in our shop and wants to buy some product. If we don't have that product on the shelf, yeah, he can maybe go to a next store or buy some other product and so on. So we are losing some kind of market in that situation. But opposite direction of the same story with stock out is, okay, we can maybe have a lot of those products on our shelves or our warehouses and inventory, and we can satisfy all demand of our customers, how much ever they want that product. But the problem is that in those situations, we are keeping too much of those products in our inventory. And as a consequence, we are losing too much money that we invested in those products because not all of them will be sold. And some of them maybe will perish, and some of them, and generally the main idea is we invest so much money in something and we can maybe invest that money in some other product and some other goods or operations and so on. So we are like always in inventory management, we are always like trading between costs of stock out and costs of carrying inventory, but as we have to have some like service level or some level to which we want to satisfy demand. And generally, usually in practice, that is 95% of the demand, but it depends on the industry and it depends on what do we really want with some product. For example, maybe if you take a look, some industries or like medicine industry, we cannot have a situation where we say we can satisfy demand in 95% cases, because if we don't have some medical equipment or some drugs or something needed for patients, somebody can die. So it is not like commercial goods where, for example, demand for beers or demand for chocolate. If we don't have chocolate on the shelves, maybe our customer will be a little bit dissatisfied, but generally speaking, nobody will die if he doesn't eat the chocolate. So there is a balance between how much we want to satisfy our customer and how much that costs us. As I said, 95% is usually seen in the practice. And as mentioned previously, there are two main policies how to control the inventory. There is continuous review inventory system, where we basically follow all the time our stock levels, and until they reach to some level, we'll call that level, I don't know, with the letter S or something. It's not important what is the letter, but when the stock reaches that level, we launch another order to acquire another inventory. And another inventory policy system is periodic review, where we basically we have a period of time where we look at our inventory. For example, once in a week time, we come to our stock levels and track and record how much of each product we have, and then place or we don't place another order. In order to maybe more easily to understand how this is functioning, this is the basic, like say, picture of the continuous review inventory system. like we have S level, and that is our reorder level, and we have some stocks. So stocks are going down, so customers are buying our products or using it, and at some point it comes to this level S, and at that point we launch another quantity, these dotted red lines here, another quantity to buy or to acquire from our suppliers in order to have in the future to satisfy our demand. But there are two key questions in this system. First quick question is how much should be this amount here that we are ordering, this Q. And another question is how much should we keep safety stock in this situation? Because when we order another quantity at this moment here, Q, we are still, our customers are still buying our product and using, and we don't want to occur in a stock out situation. So we have to have some kind of safety here in order to satisfy all the demand. So, and because as I said, there is a time gap between ordering that quantity and the time when that quantity comes. So it's a lead time here, and it depends from the basically depends on the industry. In some industries, those lead times are quite narrow, and some are much bigger. If you have, for example, some intermodal transportation and shipment overseas and so on. Well, as I said, this here previous level S, some basic kind or some basic method how to establish that reorder point. So we have mean demand during the lead time, and we can use any forecasting model to acquire that. And as I mentioned previously, mean demand is not enough. So it's just middle of that range. So possibly our demand can be lower, or that mean demand can be higher. So we have to have, like here, like said, like some safety. Like in the situation, if our mean demand was exceeded, so we can add additional amounts in our inventory to satisfy demand. And that is basically shown in this picture 7.1. So here we have some forecasting distribution, and we can see it's normal distribution with mean interval around 202 some products, units, or whatever. And the important thing here is to say that basic assumption here is this is the normal distribution. So in a lot of cases this will not be the true, but a lot of systems and a lot of softwares are using this approximation. And to transfer this figure 1 to this formula, so we can say, okay, in our situation, mean demand is 2,200 units, but we want to be very, very sure that if customers come and use our product more, we want to make sure that we satisfy that demand. So we'll not say it's enough to have this amount of products in our inventory. We want to have much higher level of our products here, like safety, just to have small pieces of here unsatisfied customers if they came, and that's how we want to keep our market share. And like here, I think it's written only 5% of chance being exceeded. And we can change these levels as we want. As I said, 95% is the most common case. We can use 99. It doesn't have sense to use 100% because these tails over here, they are quite long. So we will have to have, for example, maybe 3,050 products in our inventory just to satisfy 1 or 2% of the possible customers that would come in our market, and that's not very economic. And maybe we can, with 2,800 satisfied 97 or 98% of demand, which is quite good. And that's basically what is written over here. If we want to have, like I said, 95% service level, so only 5% of the customers will not be satisfied, we need to have 2,800 products in our inventory. Based on that normality assumption of the forecasting distribution, this is an important thing to notice, because it's not only important that our distribution is normal, it is very important how much is the standard deviation. So deviation from the mean of the normal distribution. So we have here three cases, like all these three curves are normal distribution curves, but with different standard deviations and with the same mean. So we can see we have a small standard deviation. This curve over here is pretty narrow. So if we have that kind of situation in our inventory, which is quite good, we see that the ranges over here and over here are quite low, and we can easily have big service level with not a lot of products. Well, we can maybe guess from this picture, this over here is 200 and maybe 30 will provide almost 99% of the service level. But in second situation, let's take a look at this situation with standard deviation is 40. We have the same mean, 200 units, but we can see the range of that curve is almost from 300 to, I don't know, even lower than 50. So we have a big range, a big dispersion of this forecasting distribution, and that's not very good situation, because if we take a look, so our mean demand will be 200, but if you want to satisfy 95% of the customers, let's say we have to have 280 products in our inventory, which is much more than in the previous case. How to calculate reorder level, or how to estimate what is our Z? Well, these two pictures that I was talking about, they come from the basic normal distribution, and as we all know, the normal distribution has these set values that provide us different levels of the probability, and if you want to achieve, if you want to achieve in 0.5 cases stock out, we need to take this coefficient 2.58 times standard deviation plus expected demand in the lead time, or forecasted demand in the lead time. Basically, this formula I took it from the book, from chapter 7, but in a previous slides I show it in more general way. This over here, which is basically the same as this. And some small example. Let's say expected demand in the lead time was 450. So the middle of those curve that we previously showed of our normal distribution will be 450. And the standard deviation is 50 units. And our manager in inventory, or our boss or supply chain planner, says, well, I want the situation that I will allow only 2% of chance of stocking out. Then reorder level, or that S that we saw on previous slides, will be our mean demand plus 2.05 times 50, that give us 553 units. So what does that mean? That means that our forecasting model, in a lot of cases, people only, when they are forecasting, they only take a look point forecast. Our forecasting model will gave us forecast of 450, but in inventory we will not or have this amount of quantity 450. We will have 553 units. So there will be a difference between what we are carrying in inventory and what is the point forecast. And basically this is what is said over here, that we will have 103 units of safety stock. And of course, we can see here as the larger the standard deviation, the situation is the worst, right? If we have very high standard deviation, this number over here, 553, will just grow up. So it will be higher and higher. And that means we need more money to invest and to satisfy the customer demand. So we want this standard deviation to be as low as possible. Yeah. Another system for controlling stocks is a periodic view system. It's similar to previous, but the difference is that we are not controlling our stocks all the time. We have some periods of time when we come and take a look at them and make recording what is their level. So that period of time is this R over here. So once in a week we come, we measure the amount of the stocks in that situation, and we make some ordering. For example, this system is order up to level. So we here say, okay, this is the amount of the stock, and we need to have this amount, this big S, so order this quantity. In next period of time, when we came again, we will have this amount of the stocks and say, okay, order this amount of the inventory in the future. What is specific for this model is that we need when we are making order, we need to take into account not just the lead time, the sell like in previous model. We need to take account also this review period. So when we take order, we need to have enough safety stock, which will account period for this lead time and this review period. So it's a little bit longer than in the previous case. The question about the probability distribution of future demand. I will go a little bit through a few slides backwards to highlight something, because as I said over here, if our distribution really looks like here in figure 7-8, that's very good. Yeah, because it's quite easy later to work on, and we can easily calculate the uncertainty related to the forecast and easily calculate the stocks and so on. But the problem is that in practice, usually this normal distribution is just assumption, and not in all situation we can real situation we can find here. The first approach, which a lot of softwares is using, and like the author of this book said, it can significantly underestimate the standard deviation, is to calculate the root mean square error and use that as a measure of standard deviation. Author of this book highlighted three reasons why not to do this, but there are, I think, even more, but we'll keep it just for this. For example, first reason, if we use the root mean square error from the in-sample periods, so there is always a possibility that we will underestimate the typical forecasting error, because we are basically calculating error on the training data. Yeah, because our model was built on that data. We did all the parameters on that data, and later on we use the residuals to see what is our root mean square error, and use that root mean square error as the estimation of the standard deviation. So that's not a good thing to do. Another possibility is that we use holdout samples. So we have some test sample to estimate what is our root mean square error, but sometimes we can find the situation that we don't have long enough periods to estimate the standard deviation. Maybe if I can add to this, maybe a little bit better approach is to use cross-validation, but it depends which software are you using, and does that software provider supports cross-validation. And also there is some softwares are doing scaling or root mean square error, so that's not very good thing to do. For example, we have root mean square error for one period ahead forecast, but the lead time might be much bigger than that. For example, we have root mean square error for forecasts that are made on monthly level, but our lead time is, for example, 2.5 months. So that could be also one of the reasons why root mean square error can underestimate the standard deviation. Prediction intervals, as I mentioned earlier, are very good thing to use, and generally I think that prediction intervals should become standard in observing how forecasts should be made, not just through the point forecast, because point forecasts can never be it's not the point to have point of forecasts very accurate. It's much better to have prediction intervals which are quite near the accurate values. But in order to estimate those prediction intervals, we have two situations. Like I said previously, we have one good and easy scenario, that is the forecasting probability distributions follow normal distribution. That is the case that we saw previously. And another scenario is that it doesn't follow the normal distribution. And as I said about the prediction interval, we here have a picture. I put that picture just to maybe easier to explain. So we have here forecast, and if you want to make decision on this forecast, it's not easy to do that, because we hear the point forecast here is this almost the straight line with a little bit upward trend. But if we take a look 80% and 95% prediction intervals, and if you have to make a decision based on that, so we can see that in a few steps ahead, our observed, maybe this is some kind of series, it's not important which one, but we can see that in a few steps ahead, it can go from 150 to maybe 280. So our range of possibilities is from 150 to 180. So it is not easy to come with a decision what to do. But if we didn't have these prediction intervals and we only had this point forecast, and if we believe that our point forecast was very good and that the future will be like that, we can be quite misleaded, because here we can see how much uncertainty is related to this forecast. So it's much better approach to always look the prediction intervals, not the point forecasts. Yeah, as we talk, the normality assumption is, let's say, historical, like from old inventory books, and generally in forecasting, it was easier in those times to always say the errors have normal distribution, but it is not in a real life situations always the case. One of the distributions which can be used in calculating the probability distribution of the forecasting probability is the log normal distribution. And here's the picture of that distribution. And as you can see, it is not symmetric. It has a big right tail. So generally, all the intervals, prediction intervals, will be also will not be symmetric like in case of the normal distribution. Another situation is another distribution that we can use is Poisson distribution, and it is used in a lot of cases in intermittent demand where we had discrete values. And this is some histograms of the Poisson distribution, and we can see that also Poisson distribution is centered around its mean. In this case, I think the mean is 3. Yeah, it's 3. And it also has a tail on the right. So these were two distributions that we can use to estimate our prediction intervals. And here is the example with the Poisson distribution. For example, we have some intermittent demand, and we have the 10 months of observations, and our forecasting software, or maybe just simple mean of all these values, whatever what is our forecasting model, said that in 11 months, so one step ahead forecast will be 1 unit. We can use Poisson distribution to produce 95% prediction interval. And if we follow these tables over here, we can see that demand, the probability of exceeding this demand, so probability that we will have more demand than this number here is nearly 2%. So we can say that if we want to be certain at this level, 95%, we should keep in our inventory stocks from 0 to 3 units. And if you take a look that our software gave us the prediction that demand will be 1 unit in next step ahead, so we can see that these prediction intervals are not symmetric. So one side will be 0, centered around 1, and the right side will be 3. It's not the same situation like previously with normal distribution. And I added here formula for the Poisson distribution. It's not in the book, but just to, if somebody is asking how these probabilities here are obtained, it's a classic formula for the Poisson distribution, where this lambda is the mean value, and this x here will be our value 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, or how much units are we counting. Another distribution that we can also use for the estimating the probability distribution is negative binomial distribution, and it is used in situations where we have a big standard deviation, and we can see here that I think that yeah, the mean of this distribution is centered around the 3, but the standard deviation is 3.5. So in this case, we'll have a pretty wide prediction intervals. But the main thing is here we cannot just use any of these distributions if we don't have evidence that our errors are following some of this distribution. Yeah, we cannot just say I assume that my errors will have negative binomial distribution without checking, and just implement that will certainly have the inaccurate prediction intervals. And if we use those prediction intervals for a safety stock and some other decisions, they will be wrong. I didn't want to add some slides about this because there is not a lot of talking in a book about this. And as I read it, the author said it is more for practical point of view for managers. But I can just add that during my PhD, I have a lot of issues with hierarchical forecasting and inventory management. And I could say that maybe in a 10,000 series, maybe 70 to 80% of them didn't have any relationship with all these kind of distributions to calculating prediction intervals. So I think that only maybe 5 to 10 series could have forecasting errors that could use normal distribution or negative binomial distribution or Poisson or something like that to calculate prediction intervals. But that's a whole another area to research, and a lot of researchers are doing that. So, and it is not easy; it's quite challenging. Now we move on to another topic that could be quite useful in inventory generally, or in forecasting. That's temporal aggregation. And the main idea is temporal aggregation. You get your data in some sampling frequency. For example, is it daily, is it weekly, is it monthly level, is it quarterly, or whatever. And you try to transform that data in some higher level in order to gain some benefits. Well, the question is what benefits? Well, the benefit is we are trying to smooth those series in order to reduce the noise and to maybe easier, maybe clearly to identify some patterns. And there are two approaches in temporal aggregation: non-overlapping and overlapping. Non-overlapping is approach, maybe on next slide we can more easily see it. It's just basically the summing of the periods in an upper level. So here the first row is some monthly series. So maybe just think that we have some data on a monthly level, and this is how it looks. So we can see that there is some noise in those series, and we want to reduce that noise and maybe to aggregate those series to upper level. For example, aggregate that to monthly level. So we can see that temporal aggregation, aggregating from monthly to monthly, quarterly, and to annual level, we can see that we are gaining less and less, we are gaining a more and more smoothly series. And in the end, we reduce some noise, and maybe we can have better forecasts on this annual level, more accurate and more consistent. The problem is, as we can see here, we are losing some of the data, because here, if we have monthly data, we need to, and to have 1 year, we have to sum 12 months in order to have 1 point here. Yeah, so these 12 observations here transform in 1 observation over here. So we are losing at the right end as well. But as I said, this approach can be quite good, maybe in some situation like intermittent demand, and there is a lot of testing in that sense. So, but in the book there is one suggestion, and at this point of time, I'm doing one research with my colleague Bachman Tabar, and we are not so sure is it always that. So that's the reason I put this. So literature suggests that temporal aggregation can be beneficial in improving forecast accuracy, and generally, not just author of this book, generally there is a literature that a lot of literature says that it's always good to temporally aggregate, but as I said, we are doing the last 2 years some research, and we can see that it's not always good to temporally aggregate from your basic level to some higher level, because here we can see that in 17% of the cases it was better to stay at your original level than to go some higher levels. And but the reason why, when it's better to stay or when it's better to aggregate, that's much more challenging question to answer. Another topic which can be quite useful when we are dealing with forecasting, especially forecasting of the interconnected, let's say, entities, it's hierarchical forecasting. And author of this book just mentions hierarchical forecasting, but we also have a group forecasting, which is something similar. But generally, what is that? Well, it is in practice. It is often need to have a different forecasts at different levels. So, like example over here. Some factory which is producing vehicles, maybe she wants to have a monetary forecast of total sales because she wants to plan budget on those sales. But the lower levels, for example, some colleagues in warehousing, they want to have forecasts for the each part of the cars that are selling in order to get the inventory. So there are different levels in the companies who have different needs for forecasts, and in that situation it can be quite useful that to connect all those forecasts in hierarchies and try to do hierarchical forecasting. How to do hierarchical forecasting? Well, basically there are the two main models. Those are bottom up and top down. They're quite old approaches and they're quite long in the literature, and their methodology is quite simple. For example, over here, if we imagine that this picture over here is some hierarchy, so we have a total level, like previously said, let's say that this total levels is total amount of cars sold. Level 1 will be, for example, A, B, C, and D. A will be number of cars sold maybe in one town. B will be number of cars sold in the next town, and so on. And level 2, let's say that those are dealers in some small regions. So we can say, if we want to apply these methodologies, the bottom-up methodology goes from the bottom level, so from level 2, in this situation from some dealers or retailers. So it creates forecasts at the level AA, AB, BA, BB, and so on. It creates individual forecasts in each of these nodes, and just aggregate that to the total level. Just sum those forecasts to the total level, or in order to obtain the forecasts in a total nodes A, B, C, and D. Opposite methodology is top-down. Top-down goes from the logic that we'll only create forecast at the total level, because usually series in total level are much more smooth and much more have a clearer pattern and reduced noise and so on. So we'll create forecast at the total level, and we'll have some kind of disaggregation approaches which will use how to transform those total forecasts in all other nodes on the hierarchy. Both approaches have advantages and disadvantages. Generally speaking, bottom up, since it's going from the bottom level, it can detect different kind of dynamics in each of the node and use different models to forecast those dynamics. And but the disadvantage of that is, for example, if we have a very big hierarchies with a lot of nodes, there is a question how forecastable will be that bottom level. So if we go too much deep, will come situation where the series will be very volatile, and I think in many situations intermittent. So when we come to that level, our forecast in the bottom level will be not very good, not very accurate, and by consequence, when we aggregate those forecasts to the upper levels, there is always a question how accurate will be forecasts in upper levels of the hierarchy as well. That's basically, I would say, the main disadvantage to bottom up, but the important thing to highlight that a lot of authors are highlighting that, but currently, based on my knowledge, there isn't single paper in the literature that showed that bottom up really did a very bad job. It's still holding very well with some new models, and it's still very used by practitioners. Opposite methodology, top-down forecasting. Well, the main advantage from my point of view and generally is that it only creates one forecast. You have a hierarchy which can be quite big, and you only create one forecast at the top level. So the assumption is that series at the top level will be much more smoother, and you can designate your time, expertise, knowledge to create a very good model for that series. The problem with disadvantages of the top-down is that we cannot look the individual patterns of each node in the bottom level, like in the case of the bottom-up methodology, because we are just transforming those total forecasts to the bottom level forecast. And the bigger problem of that is some researchers have shown that even if we have a top level forecasts that are unbiased, when we disaggregate them to the lower levels, forecasts in those lower levels will be biased. So that's a problem, but and that's a big disadvantage of top-down. Some issues and future developments, it's very hard to say what models to use in what situation regarding hierarchical forecasting. And another big problem is that in this level of development, the majority of them only produces the point forecast, except optimal combination, which we didn't in this book. It was not mentioned, just it was mentioned like something which will maybe bring into the future in the softwares, but optimal combination produces currently the prediction intervals, and that is something that if you want to implement those hierarchical forecasting in for example in inventory management, we should certainly have more research on that topic, how to produce intervals in order to have safety stocks and other important features of inventory management. This is basically what the author of this book have done for this, but I added some additional slides regarding this topic of hierarchical forecasting, because I think that it can answer some questions for practitioners, especially this one which said what models to use and what situation. And here I add some numerical simulation that was part of one of the researches. And so we have a hierarchy that I showed previously with 7 or 8 nodes. And we repeated that simulation process 500 times in order to see how of each model is performing. And here are the results. So here on the right side we have hierarchy, and here are the errors of the simulation process. So we can see that this first model over here is bottom up. These models over here are variations of top-down model, and over here is optimal combination. And we can see that bottom-up and optimal combination and maybe top-down forecasting proportion have the lowest error, but optimal combination is a new method, very good. And as I said, bottom-up, how much big criticism in the literature exists, is still very good regarding some new advantages like optimal combination and top-down forecasting proportion. Also, there is a link in this slide. I made let me see. I tried to make some application on the internet in order to allow comparison of different models. I don't know, Hussein, do you see the? Okay, I don't hear you, but.
Yeah, I saw just the PowerPoint.
Okay. Do you see the internet link? No.
No.
Okay.
This is the first slide. You put the first slide. Chapter 7. Yeah.
Just. Okay. So I'll just say like this. Okay. So if you go to the link at the link below this picture, there is application which you can use to see how different models are performing in a hierarchical forecasting. So everybody who is interested can compare 7 or 8 different models via different errors. There's maybe 6 or 7 errors, so it can be quite useful for practitioners to understand what models to perform. But maybe we can use this picture to a little bit explain. We can see over here, if this is our top level, we can see that all the models starting from bottom up, ending with, for example, newest one, optimal combination, have approximately the same error. But as we move down to the hierarchy, to the bottom level, we can see that this dispersion is coming more and more apparent. So the best model over here, optimal combination, have consistent forecasts and consistent errors. But for example, if we take a look at top down is becoming less and less accurate as we move through the hierarchy. So it can only be good at the top level. And basically, to wrap up this talk about this chapter 7 and topics that included, forecasts can provide us some kind of guidance in replenishing our stocks. But however, as we talked, point forecasts can are not alone cannot provide that assistance. We need a probability distribution, which is much more useful. Different softwares and forecasting packages will use different approaches to provide to the end users these kind of intervals. Sometimes in some software will only provide you the answer. Your safety stock should be this or that amount based on your based on the service level you require. Important thing to notice is that a lot of, not just some, let's say a lot of forecasting softwares have tendency to underestimate the level of uncertainty. So practitioners should be very careful about that and always double check what is software providing as them as a safety stock. And a good idea and smart idea is when you have a lot of forecasts which can be organized in a form of hierarchy or in some groups. It's a good thing to always to try to use the hierarchical forecasting and to maybe acquire more accurate forecasts. And also in situations where we have a very noisy data in your original sampling frequency, it's good to try to temporal aggregate and see if it's more accurate to forecast on that higher level than on your basic level. Basically, that is it. Thank you for your attention, and if anybody has questions or comments, you can freely ask me via email or some of the internet links down below. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Hussein.
Feel free, anyone who has question, can ask Dr. Dan now. So let me stop the recording.